let's read some scary wendigo stories. This happened in December last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude, lives in a cabin deep in the woods, no close neighbors, just the trees and whatever lives in them. I never minded visiting. I like the quiet, but after that night, I don't think I'll ever go back. It was the coldest night of the year, at least negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. My uncle had gone into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it. Something moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound. Slow, deliberate. At first I thought it was the wind, but then came a knock. Not at the door, at the window. My uncle's nearest neighbor was miles away, and no sane person would be out in the cold. The knocking came again. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. I wish I hadn't. There was something standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but emaciated, with long, bony limbs. Its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened, and its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe. And then it smiled. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should, and then it spoke. Let me in. The voice didn't match the body. It sounded wrong, too deep, too garbled. I ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking stopped, but I could hear it scraping against the walls outside. Slow and patient, like it had all of the time in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second his headlights swept across the trees, the noises stopped. He found me pale, sweating, and gripping the rifle like my life depended on it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word, just nodded and checked around the cabin. When he came back, he looked unsettled. There are no tracks in the snow, he said. Nothing. That was impossible. I heard it and I saw it, but there was nothing outside. No footprints, no marks on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent watching trees. I left the next morning and haven't been back since. My uncle still lives there, but he told me something before I left. If you ever hear it again, don't look, and whatever you do, never let it in. I haven't told anyone else this story until now, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. My sister and I were playing in the snow, and I heard our dad faintly calling my name from the forest. I was looking through the trees to see where he was when my sister said, "Are you coming? Dad's home. We have to help him with the groceries." We ran around the house to the garage, but his car was still gone and no tracks in the fresh snow. Later on, my sister said she heard him call her name from the garage. We both heard our own names 3 times, getting clearer each time. This happened to my grandpa. He went camping with his Boy Scout troop in some woods near my home. The woods take up over 10 square miles. They were about 2 miles in at a campsite. He said he woke up in the middle of the night to a rustling sound outside of his tent, and at first he didn't think much of it. He thought it was one of his friends or the troop leader taking a piss, so he went back to sleep. The next day in the morning, he asked the troop who woke him up to use the bathroom, and everyone said that no one got up last night, so he thought that someone was messing with him. That night, he was woken up again to the sound outside of his tent. However, his buddy next to him also woke up to it. My grandpa, thinking someone was pranking him again, wanted to find out who it was, so he and his buddy looked outside the tent and saw a creature walking around the perimeter of their camp. He thought it was a deer at first, so him and his buddy got closer, and they started to notice more and more details. It had legs that looked like goat's legs, long arms and claws instead of hooves, and the decaying head of a deer. They hid in a nearby bush, scared to even move. They laid there still, not daring to move until the troop leaders found them the next morning. When they told them what they saw, the other kids got so scared that they basically forced all of the leaders to bring them back home. My grandpa says that you can hear it calling to you if you get close enough to the woods. Let's read some more scary stories from the internet. I was driving across country with my mom and sister. I was 16, my sister 20, and my mom in her 50s. It was late, but we were all well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas, and they needed to pee, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on some road trip, and a small gray compact car, like a Honda Accord or some shit, parked at the pump in front of us. Two men, about 17 to 20, were standing outside the Honda in hoodies, statue fucking still. The teenagers were to our left. When we got there, everything felt wrong. There was a deep and unsettling feeling about the place, and we'd not felt that way at any other rest stop. We'd been on the road for days and seen so many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was mostly watching the car in front and the two men who had still not moved at all, not an inch. They weren't talking, they weren't on phones. There was no light anywhere but the dim overhead lights on the gas station awning. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the two men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies, and I swear to God, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes that were pitch dark and empty, truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We booked it. We have not traveled in excess of 100 miles per hour before or since, but that day it was warranted. We drove until we were in the next city before we got out of the car again. And you know the worst thing about it? Not the eyes, not the stillness, not that horrible feeling, not the weirdo in the gas station who kept telling my mom and sister, "My mama will like you," over and over while mopping the same spot on the floor with a dry mop and an empty bucket. It was the fact that we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any map we had. We'd traveled on that interstate since, and there was no rest stop. I used to work at this radio station in New Mexico that was listed as one of the most haunted places in the state. It was an old house that had been converted into offices. The story goes that the last owner of the house made a living by carving gravestones in the basement, and that he'd passed away while working on one. When the new owners of the building took over, they left the stone where it was. That was a mistake. I heard stories from people who worked there back then. Shadowy figures seen in unoccupied rooms, lights going on and off for no apparent reason. Supposedly, all the activity died down when the stone was moved out of there. Well, most of it. When I worked there, the outline of the stone was still there on the basement floor, and as I worked the night shift, I saw some weird shit. For starters, the door to the basement was in the break room, and in order to get to the vending machine, you had to walk by the door. Most of the time it was no big deal, but on occasion I would start to walk past and this terrifying feeling came over me. The hair on my neck and arms stood up. Then one night I went out into the offices and turned off all the lights. You know, save electricity and whatnot. I went back into the studio to keep doing my show. A little while earlier, I walked out and saw that all the lights were back on. There was nobody else in the building. There was also a couple of times when I watched CD players open and close on their own, which brings me to the freakiest story told to me by the overnight guy. He was doing his show, playing the new Bon Jovi song off the album, and the lights flickered for a moment. When he looked down at the display on the CD player, it was showing a different track is playing, though the song he'd been playing kept going. We pulled out the album and looked for the track that was indicated as playing. It was a song called "I'll Sleep When I'm Dead." Years ago, two friends and I were camping in the fall in a small tent, staggered with two of our heads on one side and one on the other. It was a silent night and still night with fog developing in the moist Pacific Northwest woods. What sounds like a muffled voice on a cell phone starts coming out from the center of the tent between all of our heads. I heard someone keep asking, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" My friend asks, "Are you hearing that?" At once, we all sit up and start shuffling around in the tent looking for the phone. There is no phone in the tent. I look to my friend on the other side of the tent and ask what they heard. They said it sounded like someone saying, "Hello, can you hear me?" We all agreed that this is what we heard. The next morning, we find all of our cell phones sitting in the car. and there's no cell reception at the campground. Still sends shivers up my spine. When I was in 5th grade, I once forgot to put my school uniform in the laundry basket, so the next day when I needed it for school, it was dirty. I went to have breakfast in my pajamas while I was thinking how to tell my mom I didn't have a clean uniform. When I came back to my room, there was a woman I have never seen before, in her 40s, brown dress, dark hair, ironing my uniform. I blinked and she was gone. I would have assumed I hallucinated the whole thing, but my uniform was there, clean, dried, and ironed, and ready for me to use. I stayed at my grandmother's house that my father spent a large amount of time in as a kid. My father drove us there in one go and was understandably tired after a 17-hour drive. We all started to lay down and my father checked in on us before going to bed himself. As he was talking, he stopped himself and told us to cover a large mirror, or you will have nightmares, he said. Now, nightmares from a mirror of all things sounded like a little fun to me, but my brothers, who were sleeping in the same room, asked me to cover it. I did. I asked my dad about it before he left, and he said ghosts use it as an entryway. A week later, I brought it up with my grandmother, and she scoffed, saying, "Oh, this house ain't haunted." I agreed, but told her that the reason I brought it up was because my dad told me to cover a mirror. My grandmother then changed her expression and said, "Oh, the mirror?" Apparently that mirror came from her grandmother. She worked as a nurse and took in those who were going to die but could not pay for their care on their last days. So she made her home into a new hospice. Those who stayed in the room with the mirror saw things. A lovely old lady saw and heard a young lady come into her room and played a harp. She was thankful for the lovely songs, but no person was known, nor was a harp owned or heard elsewhere. A young boy found an older boy who played games with him and really knew his games. Lastly, a terrible woman who refused to use the bathroom and pooped in a cooking pot and then hid it under her bed said she saw the devil in the mirror that spat fire at her. I also got stories from my mother seeing the same lady who played the harp, and my grandfather said he saw the devil. My grandfather described it as a red man with horns that was too tall for the room. It stared down at him and simply asks, "Why are you here?" I kept that mirror covered. Let's read some more scary stories that were sent to us. 6 years ago, my family and I moved to South Africa. We moved into my mom's friend's house. It was a small house, and it was also very old. One night, we went to bed just like any other night. I slept next to my mom and my twin brother because the house was very small, and I have 6 siblings, and there were only 2 rooms. So you could imagine we were pretty cramped in there. Anyway, I was laying in bed with my mom and my twin brother one night, and in the middle of the night, I woke up because I had a nightmare. I looked in the corner of my room and I saw myself standing. I wasn't creeped out, I was just confused. It looked exactly like me, but she was creepy. She was looking in my eyes, smiling, and tilting her head in a weird, creepy way. I didn't get too scared very easily when I was younger, so I went back to bed thinking I wouldn't see it again. But then I woke up again and I saw that it's gotten even closer. I closed my eyes, praying it would go away. But I opened my eyes and saw myself again, smiling and tilting my head, and I thought to myself, how is this even possible if I'm in bed? I went back to bed and woke up and saw it again. This time I was so sick of seeing it because I started actually getting scared, so I stood up really fast and ran towards it, and then it just disappeared. When it disappeared, I heard the cupboard next to the bed shake. I quickly jumped into my bed and hid under the covers, and I fell back asleep. I was so scared the next morning. A few years later, me and my siblings were talking about the house, and I told them about my experience, and I thought I was the only one experiencing all of this paranormal stuff, only to find out all of them were experiencing it too, but they didn't want to speak about it because they were also scared. My older brother and my oldest sister were telling me how they were in the garage one time and they heard stuff moving, but they were the only ones in there. My oldest sister also said she felt like someone was watching her in that house. And one time, I went to the kitchen to make my twin brother's cereal, and while I was pouring the cereal into a bowl, I heard a little girl talk in my ear. I got so scared and ran to my room, but my brother begged me to go back. So I went back, and then she spoke into my ear again, and I ran right back to my room. My mom later invited some nuns to the house, and they told her that there was an evil presence there. I'm so glad we finally moved out. South Africa, y'all. There's something evil over there. This next story happened in Minnesota. This happened about 5 years ago, so I was around 10 at the time. I was living at my great uncle's house with my mom, brother, and dad. We lived right next door to my grandma and grandpa's house, so we would frequently go over there. One night, I was home alone as my family was over at my grandparents' house having a bonfire. I fell asleep, but soon after woke up, looked over, and saw my brother standing in my room. He was standing in front of the window looking outside. My window faced the driveway of our house, and I couldn't see anything that he could be looking at. I got annoyed with him and called out to him to ask him what he was doing, but got no response. I got out of bed and walked over to him to confront him. Once I got right behind him, I went to reach out and grab his shoulder, but my hand went right through him. All I felt was cold air, and then he faded until I was standing there alone. I jumped when I heard a four-wheeler take off. I looked out my window and saw someone exiting the driveway on a four-wheeler. I got really scared and jumped back into my bed and crawled under the blankets. I lied there for a while until I heard talking outside my door. I quickly jumped up and ran out of my room to find my mom getting home with my brother. I asked her if my brother had been in my room messing with me, but she told me that they just got back and our neighbor had just dropped them off on her four-wheeler. To this day, I have no idea what was in my room pretending to be my brother. Alright, y'all, this next one is in South Africa. When I was a kid, I lived in a small town in the Transvaal. Basically, what happened was something evil lived in the house with us. It scared everyone at night specifically. I think it lived in the dark because it would never do anything in the light. We had a pet ringneck named John, and he would swear at us but never speak. One night he started laughing like crazy, and it woke my mom up at 1 a.m. My mom turned on the light and went to cover the bird's cage with a blanket, and it went silent. She turned off the light and was walking back to her room when she walked past a man who she just thought was my dad. She climbed into bed and realized my dad was in bed sleeping. After a while, she fell back asleep and woke up to my dad kicking the bedside table to splinters while he was asleep. He ended up breaking his foot. Days later, I became the target. I was small, so I don't remember too much, but I remember running to my parents' room almost every night out of fear. Something would tell me to stop running away or it would eat my feet. I had scratches all over my body after night terrors, and I would sleepwalk and wake up in strange places around our house. Our dogs also started refusing to come inside and would only sleep outside. After living in that house for 3 years, I'm traumatized. I slept next to my parents' bed until I was 12. I'm currently 22 and it still follows me, and I can absolutely never be in dark places alone. I don't like talking about it because I feel like it knows when I do. And this person is looking for some advice on how to get that evil away from them. I told them maybe talk to a medium, but if y'all have better advice, leave it in the comments. Let's read some scary stories about skinwalkers. Yes, I'm going to say the word for the video. That being said, I claim no negative energy from these stories, from this video. Yes, I have the lights on. I have the volume on the TV on just for some background noise. Anyway, I found some stories on Reddit, and the last one is probably the best one. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been very superstitious. For lack of a better word, she's not religious, but she does believe in a lot of paranormal stuff. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo and her father was Irish. Either way, she'd never been anywhere east of Montana and she grew up in Nevada. One year, when I was in grade school, we went to visit her. Most of the visit was pretty uneventful, typically boring old people stuff, except she always kept her curtains drawn shut and would always peek out the window, and when someone asked what she was doing, she would simply reply, "Yenel Delushi is watching me." This went on nearly for the entire visit, until a few days before we were due to leave. My grandma and my baby brother were in the front yard that evening, planting flowers, when all of a sudden, my grandmother starts shouting at my baby brother, "Stay away from that creature, it's not safe." Of course, being in Nevada, we all assumed that my baby brother found a scorpion or a rattlesnake, so we all run outside to see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard was a large black Great Dane-sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with intensity I'd never seen before. It looked up at us, gave a little huff, and bounded off. I don't remember if it moved unusually fast or not, but do remember it had really deep yellow eyes. When my mother asked my grandmother what had happened, she kept repeating, "The Yenel Delushi has found me." She moved a couple weeks after that. So this happened about 12 years ago. My family owns a farm in the heart of an Indian reservation. One winter, I was home for Christmas taking care of the farm while my parents were away Christmas shopping. As I was home by myself, and way late in the night, I hear all of the cows start freaking out. I knew it had to be the wild dogs that are rampant in the area, so I throw on some boots and head out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It was cloudy, but there was a full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds just right to light up all of the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field. Just in time, I see two dogs. They were standing up facing each other and fighting. So I pump a shell into the chamber of my 12 gauge, and then it happened. The two dogs heard the rack. They both stopped, looked over at me, and ran away on their back legs. Immediately I froze, and every ghost story about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew through my mind. This didn't happen to me, but happened to my uncle. He is Mexican and Native American. This happened in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. He was driving around with his girlfriend late at night, and they saw something that looked like a huge black dog on the side of the road. He slowed down, and the dog began crossing the road. Instead of walking like a normal dog would, this thing moved like a toy rocking horse. He said it stopped in the middle of the road and stared right at them, and its eyes had a red glow. My uncle is the most badass person I know, and it scared the crap out of him. Back in 2019, I went on a missions trip with my old church's youth group to Montana. We went on a Native American reservation for 2 to 3 weeks. It was right before I started my freshman year of high school, and everyone was around that age, and it was getting close to sundown, and we had decided to play manhunt. The area of the reservation we were on had an open field that was surrounded by the woods, and I decided to go as far as I could. I was hiding, and I heard one of my friends who was on my team calling my name, and it sounded far away but in the opposite direction of our camp setup. So I started going towards them, and I kept hearing it, but it constantly sounded further away. I kept going until I saw a decrepit deer. I was about 150 yards away from our camp at this point and turned around and booked it without looking back. By the time I got back to camp, I saw everyone chilling, doing their own thing, and I went up to the person who I heard calling me, and they said that they had stopped playing 10 minutes before I came back, and they just thought I was in the bathroom at one of the porta potties the whole time. I had an old friend who was a skeptic, but for whatever reason, he seemed to believe in skinwalkers. Turned out, he lived in a pretty big hotspot for them as a kid and had other childhood friends who had extreme experiences. I had gone over to his place relatively late one night, and we got to talking about creepy shit. He mentioned that one of his childhood friends couldn't mention the word, or she would apparently start vomiting without fail. I thought nothing of it and moved the conversation along. Around 2 to 3 a.m., he wanted to go smoke by the river near his apartments. At one point, he's talking about something traumatic and starts to sing for whatever reason. Meanwhile, I'm looking across this river towards the other side of the street and see a giant dog running down the path with no owner and no collar. I tell my friend, and he sees it too. It looks at us and suddenly shifted into what looked like a hairless dog, and then into a mountain lion with bent legs, and then into a fully shaped naked person on all fours, but its face was completely mangled. We both started running back to the apartments, and we watched this thing track us through the bushes with glowing eyes and the cracking of branches. We got back to the apartment, and we were absolutely floored and shaken up. Bro had no idea how to process it, especially since he was high. One of the creepiest things I've seen for a while, and I'll never forget it. I'm scared now. Let's read another scary skinwalker story. I decided to join my bestie Karen for a 3-day stay at her grandmother's place on the res. Her grandmother lives near a place called Tuba City, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere but surrounded by rural homes. We go to college together, and I was kind of interested to know about Navajo tradition. The first day we stayed, it was pretty chill, nothing out of the ordinary, but then her grandma said that a stray dog came out of nowhere and wouldn't leave. To me, it did act kind of strange and was ugly looking. black, shaggy coat, looked like a mix between a German Shepherd and a lab. That night, we were watching a movie in the living room with the curtains wide open. Grandma was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and we were watching a movie. Next to the window is a medium-sized bookshelf and where DVDs are kept. Karen went to put back a DVD we had just watched, but she freaked out because that stray black dog was staring at us through the window, standing on top of the wood box outside. Not something normal dogs do from my point of view or hers. The other dogs seemed to stay away from it. Karen opened the door and yelled at it to get off the box. It ran off behind the shed. We went to Tuba City to get some groceries, came back to the house. The dog was nowhere to be seen, nothing unusual. Grandma went to visit some people, so it was just Karen and I. About 5 o'clock, we heard someone trying to open the door. Both of us looked outside since there had been no car heard and no dogs barking. Looking out the living room window to the door, and there was the dog trying to open the door with its paws. 2 paws wrapped around the brass doorknob, standing on its hind legs. I thought that was weird, but wasn't really freaked out. Karen was, though. She opened the door and chased it off. Grandma came back later and Karen told her what happened. Grandma didn't like what she heard. We got ready to go to sleep. We slept in the spare bedroom since it had 2 beds. One window with curtains, open just a little. We turned off the light, but there was a sound coming from on top of the roof. Pitter-patter footsteps and scratching sounds and panting. It then sounded like it jumped off onto the large plastic water barrel they had. At first, we heard what sounded like barking, but as it grew louder, the other dogs seemed to be barking at something also. But all of a sudden, something was running around the house barking, and it was no dog. Nope, it wasn't. This barking sounded human, a deep male voice barking like it knew that we knew that it wasn't a dog. Karen decided to open the curtains to look out. There was the stray dog on its hind legs looking into our bedroom, but this time it stunk. And what I thought were 2 black holes in the neck, another pair of eyes twinkled, and the paws were deformed looking hands with overgrown, somewhat thick and sharp fingernails. Again, both screaming and shutting the curtains closed. Grandma comes running through the door and she sees it. First thing she did was grab ashes from the fireplace, load 3 shells into the shotgun from under her bed, bless herself in Navajo, and went outside to shoot it, yelling in Navajo about how the thing wasn't welcome there and to get the hell out of there for it to go linger somewhere else. Them both being traditional, the next day they called a medicine man to come over and put cedar in. He prayed over everyone with cedar smoke and an eagle feather, blessed the place. He made us eat bitter herbs called eagle's gull or something like that, and gave me an arrowhead. Apparently I needed to carry one for protection and a little pouch called corn pollen. Seems to work pretty well. The medicine man said that the dog was a skinwalker, which in Navajo is a long word, but I call them yoshis. The body of a stray dog, which was unalived by the skinwalker, made an illusion so we wouldn't know it was a real dog. He also said that yoshis tend to harm people by using some sort of human bone straw to spit at someone. Doctors can't detect it, but the medicine man that day pulled a piece of human skull out of Grandma's right shoulder, pretty big, about 2 inches long and 1 centimeter thick. It was real because we watched him pull it out of her. That was intense. Let's read some more scary Reddit stories. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk. The streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street, there was this man walking by himself, maybe in his 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him, I said, "Hey, behind you," and he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a bitch and he was going to end me and all of that. I live right off the corner and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my front porch. The dude knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friend's house, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always ended up falling asleep on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. So one night, I wake up to this prickly feeling, like an instinct. Just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs. I tremble in my mom's arms until Dad comes in and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still, and I finally think, I can sleep. Nope. I notice a man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. And that's why I don't like to look out the window at nighttime. When I was a young child, I had the same dream every night for years about drowning when a huge wave swept over me and I sank to the bottom. Years later, I had a temp job delivering mail one summer during college. I saw this old lady sitting on a front porch waiting for me. When I got up there, she looked at me and said in a foreign accent, "You drowned when Oceana sank beneath the waves." Freaked me out. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m. and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just came in my room. I went to pick up and the call ended as soon as I reached for the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her. So I busted in, and of course nobody was there. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters away from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She tells me that her phone is not even in her room and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is actually downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have a log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. Never managed to explain this one. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room, there was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering the arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy, dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket for my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat, there were 2 important factors that worked in my favor. 1, it was mid-afternoon and I wouldn't need the lamp's light. And 2, the closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. So without lifting my gaze, I stared at the floor, entered the room, and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was towards the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room was different, brighter. The light was on, and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze for an eternity, then felt my survival instinct kick in and wanted to run, screaming in horror, but before all that, I still had to look. Man, I wish I hadn't looked. As I turned to exit the room, I lifted my stupid head only to confirm that the doll's hand was raised and that it was pointed directly at me. Why do we have lamps shaped like dolls? No, ma'am. I would throw it in the trash. Let's read some scary sleep paralysis stories. And if you hear noises in the background, it's just my kitten. She is very energetic this morning. I knew there was a thing in my closet, something really evil, but I also knew I was dreaming and I should face my fear. I tried to look directly at the closet door, but if I moved my eyes, my head would turn away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look directly at it. Then I woke up in a cold sweat. At first, I felt really relieved that it was over, but very shortly after, I realized it wasn't a dream and there was really something in my closet. I was laying down on my back and couldn't move, and I didn't really hear it, but I could kind of feel this sickening laughter wash over me and through me in waves. All of a sudden, the thing throws a human head at me and it lands on my chest face up. It was this girl I knew in high school. Up to this point, I was kind of holding it together, terrified but not panicked. Well, I lose it now. I can't even scream. All I can do is make these grunting sounds. And I'm wiggling and straining, trying to rock from side to side to get it off me, but I can't move. This seemed to last maybe a minute or two, and then I really woke up. It was so traumatic that for weeks I would be scared when I woke up, that I wasn't actually awake and something horrible could happen at any second. It still makes my skin crawl when I think about that laugh. The thing is, I had never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors at that point in my life. I thought I was losing my mind. Freshman year of college, I was semi-dreaming. In this dream, I'm sitting on a bench with a hallway in front of me. My wife was next to me. Mind you, I have no wife and no girlfriend. Nonetheless, I knew this was my wife. She was holding our child. At the end of the hallway, there was a mirror. I look up at the mirror, see my wife and child there. I look back down at my baby. The baby turned to charcoal and blew away in front of my eyes. I looked back into the mirror and there was a wispy old woman looking back into my eyes. Then, while making eye contact, she screamed the most blood-curdling scream I could ever imagine. I woke up completely unable to move. I was terrified. I was laying in my bed with my girlfriend at the time. I woke up from a really intense dream I had. I tried to turn around, but I couldn't move a muscle. All of a sudden, I hear a man yell, "Watch out, he's awake." At that moment, I fully panicked. I felt a big pressure on my chest and had the idea I was tied down on a huge dentist-like chair. Then I heard a huge metal door close very loudly, and then a silence. A moment later, I heard nothing but my girlfriend breathing in her sleep. I knew she was laying next to me. I used all the power in me to move or wake her up in some way, but it was useless. I still couldn't move. I was 100% sure I was abducted by aliens, who, as soon as I woke up, transported me from their ship back to my bed somehow. When I could move again, I was still in panic, so I woke up my girlfriend, who annoyingly told me to go back to sleep and tell her in the morning. A bit disappointed, I look at the clock, around 4 a.m. I go downstairs, grab a glass of juice, and smoke a cigarette in my garden, explaining to myself what happened. I took my tablet and then found out it was sleep paralysis. To this day, I am 100% sure that anyone who truly believes they have been abducted by aliens just encountered sleep paralysis instead. One of my many reoccurring dreams involves some sort of evil entity or spirit in my room. I've had this nightmare many times but never managed to see the form of the entity or whatever it is. I only feel it when I enter my bedroom, kind of like walking underwater. I feel heavy and my body can't move. I was having some kind of nightmare, can't recall exactly what. Sort of like a lot of quickly flashing scenes of demons and ghosts and stuff trying to kill me. The kind of dream where you're completely horrified. I heard something kind of jostle me out of sleep and turned my head to see a translucent child with a burned face just staring at me. Super graphic burns, like wet looking. Eyes gone, but somehow still looking at me. I couldn't move or scream or even close my eyes. My body was refusing to obey any of my commands, and for an irrational moment I wondered if I was dead or dying somehow. The child with the burned face reached out to touch me, and I damn near cried. I was panicking so hard. I've only experienced what I believe to be sleep paralysis once, and still think about it to this day. I'm in my room looking at a double of myself laying in bed sleeping, while a large, shadowy figure stands over my sleeping body, not doing anything but standing there and staring down at me. I start screaming at myself to wake up, to get out of here, etc. Then all at once, it's like I couldn't breathe or move as the creepy being turns and slowly stalks over to me. He has no facial features. I eventually wake up in a cold sweat, horribly disturbed because of how real it felt. Maybe it was simply a terrible nightmare, but I felt as if I was paralyzed and choking. Okay, let's read some scary stories that were sent to us. But before we get into it, I had already recorded this damn video, and at the end of it, there was no sound. And during the video, like, I had the fireplace going on my TV, I had all the lights off. In the middle of the video, I heard like a weird scary sound. So I got up and turned all the lights on, and I turned Rhett and Link on. We need some good vibes. These two stories are scary, okay? They're just scary, okay? Let's get through this. This story takes place when I was around 8 or 9 years old. My house is very old and very haunted. It used to be a funeral home, a restaurant, and a home for many people before my family ever lived here. One night I woke up to my cat sitting at the edge of my bed, meowing in a way that I've never heard him meow before. It was almost like a hiss mixed with a growl. I opened my eyes to see a tall man that looked like a shadow bending towards me, standing at the end of my bed. I was frozen from fear and started shaking. I put the covers over my head and held it there for maybe 2 minutes, and when I peeked my head out to see if he was still there, he was. The shadow figure stood standing still, watching me for what felt like an eternity until I just forced myself asleep. The next night, the same thing happened. This time I picked up my screeching cat and yelled for my mom. When my mom came in, the thing slowly disappeared or faded away. Then on the third night, it happened again. I was starting to wonder if this would happen every night and I'd have to just make peace with it. This time, when I woke up to my cat hissing at the figure, I started shaking. I then told it to leave. It didn't budge. So I got up and ran to my mom's room and jumped in her bed. My mom's room is right across the hallway from mine, so I can see my doorway from her bed, and the thing was still in my room and my cat was still hissing. My cat is not aggressive in any way and he's very shy, so I could tell that whatever that was not a good presence. My mom believes my story, but she also thinks that it was just sleep paralysis. That got me wondering if it was too, but if it was sleep paralysis, how did my cat see it too? Anyway, I want to know what other people think of this and if they have experienced something like this as well. Okay, so if you've experienced something like this, let us know in the comments. But if your animal thinks something is weird, then something is probably weird. When I was 12, I was living in Fort McMurray, Alberta. I was home alone one night and I was already pretty creeped out because I've heard and seen stuff before. It was around 10:45 at night when I got up from bed to go make some food. I was very scared to go downstairs. I lived in a 3-story house with a creepy-ass basement. Anyway, as I was going down the stairs, I thought I saw someone out of the corner of my eye. It looked like my little sister, but again, I was home alone for the weekend. I got freaked out but tried not to give it any attention. I got downstairs and my kitchen lights were on and my basement door was open, even though I had turned off all the lights and closed the door before I went upstairs hours beforehand. I was really scared but closed the basement door anyway. I walked into the kitchen and started cooking. About 45 minutes had passed when I heard something walking up my basement stairs. I thought my dad might have came home early from work. We had a door to the parking lot in the basement, so I didn't think anything of it. When the footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs, I was expecting my dad to walk in. When no one came through the door, about 10 minutes later, I called my dad and asked if he was home. He said no and that he was still an hour away at work. I freaked out and went running back up to my room and slammed my door, locking it. I could hear stuff in my living room moving around and thought someone might have broke in. I heard heavy boots walking up the stairs and go into the bathroom. Then they walked to my bedroom door and stopped. I was in my closet hiding. Then the closet door started shaking violently and I was quietly crying and trying to text my mom. About 20 minutes later, I came out of my closet and my room was completely trashed and there were big scratch marks on my door. I called my guy friends to come over and check out my house. They walked into my house and checked all the rooms. We found nothing or no one. We were all freaked the fuck out and sat on my couch downstairs. That's when we all heard someone upstairs walking around in all the rooms and the basement door flung open on its own. We freaked out some more and ran out my front door. I ended up staying with a friend that weekend until my parents were home. They came home to the place completely trashed and scratch marks up the walls. Safe to say, we moved out a couple weeks later. Okay, that one is obviously very scary, but was that paranormal or did somebody actually break in? And why is scary shit always happening in Canada, and Australia, and South Africa? That's the story I was reading, by the way, when I heard a creepy noise in my house and had to get up and turn all the lights on and turn on Rhett and Link. So I think I'm done reading scary stories for today. Let's read some creepy Reddit stories. These ones are like abduction, home invasion stories. And of course I'm home alone. Not my own abduction, but my cousin was abducted. She lives in Mexico. One day, as she was walking home after being dropped off by the school bus, she was pulled into a van by men wearing bandanas over their faces. They tied her up and placed a hood over her head. They drove for a long time, according to her. She was taken to a barn and was left there. Inside the barn were other young women tied up. She asked them, "What's going on and where are we?" But the women wouldn't answer her. She somehow got loose from her rope and started to look for an escape. She found a window and saw that the sun was setting. She broke the window with a chair. She urged the other girls to come with, but they were too scared to leave. My cousin left them and she ran non-stop to the nearest town. She stayed off the roads in case they were looking for her. Luckily, she found a phone in the town and called her family. She's safe now, but she could never remember where the location of the barn was. She still feels guilty about it all. My best friend's parents were out of town one weekend and she had the house to herself. Went about her business having dinner, watching TV, then decided to go to bed. She was laying in her bed with her back to the closet when she heard the door open. She somehow pretended to be asleep. The man who was hiding in the closet walked around her bed to the side she was laying, gently stroked her hair and face, then left. She immediately called her boyfriend to ask him to come over, then called her parents and then the police. Long story short, this man had been getting into their home via a doggy door. They didn't have a dog and didn't bother to secure it. And he'd been living in a tent in the foresty area behind their home for months to creep on her. They found a ton of surveillance footage of her sleeping and pieces of her clothes. My cousin and his wife and their infant son had lived in their house for about 5 years. His wife left home to drop the baby off at daycare before work, but realized she had left her phone at home. Entering the house, she turned the corner to the hallway and nearly ran into the drop-down attic ladder, which was fully extended. They never used the attic as it was filled with loose insulation, and my cousin had left for work hours earlier. She quietly left the house, drove around the corner, and called the police. When the police investigated, they found a short-range transmitter connected to several cameras hidden throughout their home. The light fixture in the shower, the ceiling fan above their bed, even a pinhole in the nursery were sending videos to a nearby location. Their neighbor a few houses away had been given a key by the prior owners and installed surveillance equipment once he knew their schedule. My cousin's wife walked in on him updating his equipment, but he forgot something at his house and left to get it when she walked in. He had been watching them for years. That is freaking insane. I was in college and had the only room on the ground floor. I was bartending, so I got home at like 3:30 a.m. I had just changed and gotten into bed when I heard someone fiddling with my window screen. I lived in a beach town, and usually I left my windows cracked open to hear the ocean as I fell asleep. I first thought it was one of my roommates who forgot their keys or something, but realized they would have called me first. So I flattened myself against the foot of my bed in the wall to look. It was a dude in a black hoodie with a box cutter cutting my window screen. As he was lifting himself to enter, I jumped up onto my bed and kicked him as hard as I could on the chest. He fell into the parking lot, hit a bike rack, and was knocked unconscious. I slammed my window shut, bolted it, and called the cops. By the time they showed, he was gone, but they found him 2 blocks away. His bag had zip ties and duct tape in it, and he had a record of SA. The cops blamed me for a bit for having my windows open. I kept my windows shut after that. Why are we blaming the victim? I mean, I know it's not smart to sleep with your windows open, but victim blaming is kind of crazy.